Monster movies have been around for over a century now, and a century before moving pictures, we read Gothic literature about our mysterious dark counterparts. And thousands of years before mass publication, people exchanged tales of mythological creatures, proving that if one thing's for sure, the fear of the unknown and the story of humanity are inseparable entities. For the first half of the 20th century, Universal Pictures explored this relationship in creature features, establishing characters such as Frankenstein's monster, Dracula, the Mummy, the Invisible Man, and the subject of today's video, the Wolfman, as indelible icons of pop culture and horror cinema history. Hi, and welcome to Studio Cinema Saturday, the show where we review films old and new, the ones that you don't like and the ones that you do. I'm your host, Dalton Sherrill, and today we're going to be taking a look at Leigh Whannell's Wolfman. Now before we get into this review, let's establish a little groundwork for my relationship to the Wolfman, or just werewolves in general, in the cinematic landscape. And no, just to clear the air, I myself am not a lycanthrope or a werewolf. I am simply a hairy individual who goes feral sometimes and howls at the moon. Two similarities that are purely coincidental, probably. Now, prior to deciding that I was going to review this film, I had never seen a werewolf movie. Well, not a proper one anyway. Because of my limited knowledge on the subject, I did not feel I was a credible enough source to give you guys my take on this reimagining of a classic tale. So, I did some homework. First, I watched 1985's Silver Bullet, and if any of you have seen this movie, you know this was a strange first pick. The film is about a young, wheelchair-bound boy named Marty discovering that the priest of this very tight-knit, small town is a werewolf, and the conflict that ensues. As most of you probably know, in werewolf lore, one of the only ways you can truly kill one is by shooting it with a silver bullet. But that's not the only thing the title is referring to. Marty has this eccentric Uncle Red, played by Gary Busey, that has attached an engine to his wheelchair, allowing it to go the speed of like a dirt bike. It's a unique and comical component of this film that certainly separates it from other werewolf stories, but also immortalizes it as a piece of weird 80s cinema. While the story, costume design, and special effects were nothing to write home about, the absurdity of the narrative and the witty dialogue made the film a guilty pleasure to watch. Next, I journeyed back to 1941 to watch the original Universal film titled The Wolfman. And I have to say, it thoroughly surprised me. The only other Universal monster movie I've seen is Frankenstein, and while I still think Frankenstein's monster is a better creature in regard to both depictions, this film definitely had a better story. Larry Talbot returns home to his father's house after the death of his brother. After catching up with his father, he spies an attractive woman through a telescope in the upstairs of a nearby antique shop. Larry visits the antique shop and befriends Gwen, who sells him a cane with a silver pommel and a pentagram. Surely nothing will go wrong. Later that day, the two visit a fortune teller, and on their way back, Larry is attacked by a wolf. He beats it to death with his cane, but is bitten in the process. This movie ultimately sets up all of the classic werewolf lore. It's an excellent film that I recommend everyone watch. And last but most certainly not least, I watched An American Werewolf in London, and it was definitely my favorite of the three. David and Jack are these two American college students that are hiking through the English countryside, and they come across a werewolf that murders Jack and brutally injures David. As he recovers in a hospital, he develops a relationship with a nurse named Alex. All the while, Jack continuously visits David through nightmares and day terrors, informing him that he's becoming a werewolf himself. Jack explains that the only way he'll be free is if David ends his own life or dies, breaking the curse and setting his soul free. This film features thrills, laughs, romance, and above all, the definitive werewolf transformation in all of cinema. To this day, truly no werewolf movie scene has encapsulated such visceral and disturbing energy as this sequence. Now that we're up to speed on werewolf movies, let's discuss some spoiler-free thoughts about Leigh Whannell's Wolfman. Now, if you're not familiar with Leigh Whannell, he's the guy that wrote and directed 2018's Upgrade and 2020's The Invisible Man. But perhaps one of his most iconic feats is playing Adam in the original Saw film. Anyways, what did I think about this film? Well, I can't say that it's my favorite werewolf movie. The story, albeit unique, is fairly simple and doesn't do a whole lot to throw the audience off the scent of its resolution. You kinda know where it's going after a certain point, and I think it kills some of the initial tension. As far as characters go, I think we have a solid cast, minus our two leads, Christopher Abbott and Julia Garner respectively, not having the most chemistry in the first act. But once we get into the actual werewolf curse or virus in the film, we really get to see their dynamic shine. Additionally, I love the depiction of the two very different relationships two parents can have with their child and how that dynamic plays into the overall themes of the film. But the werewolf they portray in this film is very much this human wolf half-breed that runs on two legs, but also has moments where it moves on all fours. Additionally, most, if not all, werewolf lore is seemingly thrown out the window, and I'm kind of okay with that. Leigh Whannell wasn't trying to remake 1941's The Wolfman, but rather his own unique spin on the character, which I can respect. Seeing how far cinema has come in regards to visual and special effects, I think we could have had a cooler werewolf transformation. But on that same token, I did enjoy the slow regression into the creature that they show off in the trailer. For a good chunk during the middle of the film's runtime, our main character is essentially a ticking time bomb, and the entire time they just have you wondering when he's gonna blow up and hurt the people that he loves. Overall, I think one of my favorite aspects of the movie is the cinematography and the visual effects working in tangent to convey what Blake's going through. Again, this is something they show in the trailer. Ugh, trailers these days, they spoil everything. And we even have this sort of werewolf vision, in which we truly get to see things from the creature's point of view. All of these things are awesome, and even just the non-werewolf cinematography was absolutely breathtaking. Plus, there were super choreographed, fluid shots that captured numerous compositions in a single shot, which I am an absolute sucker for. Ultimately, I thought it was a good film. I think for me, it just lacked a couple more twists, turns, and tension toward the end of the film, which will inevitably bite the score that I give it. But if you're looking for a modern depiction of the Wolfman that goes off the beaten path of the lore and has a fresh and unique style to it, I'd say give it a watch. It's not gonna blow your mind. Most creature features won't. But it's definitely not gonna be the worst horror film you see this year. Now, let's get into the fine details of Wolfman. The film opens to a sprawling mountain valley in 1995 Oregon. On-screen text appears, informing the audience of a hiker that went missing and came down with a virus, cursing him with what the movie describes as Face of the Wolf. We're introduced to our primary character, a young boy named Blake, who has a strict military father named Grady. In the film's initial scene, the two prepare to embark on a hunting trip. Early on into the trip, the two encounter a deer that becomes spooked and runs away. Blake wanders off to find the deer and sees a mysterious figure through the scope of his rifle. He's reunited with his father, who hears the creature nearby, telling Blake to climb up into the nearby hunting blind. Then, the animalistic sounds begin to grow as the figure draws closer, getting so close that Blake and Grady can see its breath rise over the edge of the hunting blind. Then, the deer reemerges and is brutally murdered by the creature, allowing the two to escape shortly afterwards. We're then greeted with a 30-year time jump that shows Blake living with his family in San Francisco. His wife Charlotte is played by Julia Garner, best known for her role as Ruth in Ozark, and together they have a daughter named Ginger. Being between jobs, Blake ultimately spends most of his time taking care of Ginger, while Charlotte works as a journalist. Blake and Ginger's relationship is adorable, and he'll do this little thing where he puts her hand on his forehead, and then he'll ask, "What am I thinking?" To which she responds, "I love my little girl." Every time they do this, it's very sweet, and I like how it factors in later. Our inciting incident is Blake receiving a letter in the mail, informing him of the death of his father Grady. As his one and only son, Blake must go out to the old farmhouse he grew up in to remove his father's things. But before they can get there, a shadowy figure appears in the middle of the road, causing Blake to steer the vehicle off a cliff. This moment genuinely has a lot of shock value, and I love that they show the truck's POV as it smashes through trees and thick foliage on its way down. Then the Wolfman starts coming after our characters and scratches Blake's arm. After this, the family's able to run away and make it to the farmhouse. And this is where some of my favorite scenes occur. I think in retrospect, some of my favorite scenes were Blake transforming in the house. Also, I didn't know there were going to be two werewolves in this movie. So to have the father, the protector of the household, simultaneously becoming a monster himself, I thought that aspect of the plot was really cool. Bro is losing teeth, he's sweating, and his arm wound looks absolutely disgusting at this point. And they do this fake out where he goes upstairs and it sounds like the werewolf has just gotten on the roof, but in all reality, Blake just has super sensitive hearing now. And he's just hearing this spider move along the wall, which was also a really cool moment. This movie has a fair amount of jump scares, so if you're not into those, probably don't watch this movie. However, one technique that's also used is having shots that seem like they're framed for jump scares, but they actually aren't. So whenever they do decide to pull a jump scare out, it has a little bit more punch. At this point, Blake has been injured by the werewolf once again. He's got this animalistic, heat-seeking sort of vision, and he begins to grow fur and fangs. Blake also can't understand Charlotte anymore, because as we see from his perspective, everything she says sounds like gibberish. At one point and out of nowhere, Blake just starts biting into his infected arm like he's at a hot dog eating contest, and you're just like, oh no, we've lost him. However, probably one of the most heart-wrenching scenes is whenever Ginger places her hand on her father's forehead as he's mid-transformation, and she once again asks him what he's thinking. Of course, he doesn't respond and kind of begins to snarl at her, and it just makes you feel sad. Later, Charlotte sees the rundown pickup outside and manages to get it started. The family's about to get away when she hits the windshield wipers, revealing the werewolf behind the muck. Unfortunately, this is a cool jump scare they put in the trailer in an attempt to put butt cheeks in seats. While Charlotte and Ginger make for the house, a werewolf fight ensues. Later, Blake returns to the house even more messed up than before, and this is the closest he's been to losing control on his family as he coughs up a severed finger and menacingly stares them down. Suddenly, the other werewolf has made his way into the house. Werewolf Fight Part 2, but we actually get to see it this time. The fight concludes as Blake rips out the jugular of the opposing werewolf. He then notices a tattoo on the creature's arm, signaling to Blake and to the audience that the monster was really Grady, Blake's father. After this, it's werewolf time, baby. Blake runs outside and completes his transformation, which we really only see in a couple shots. Kinda wish there was more there, but I guess we've been seeing him slowly transform for a minute now. Blake starts to come for his family, who hides in a nearby barn. This is where I started to lose interest. Although they made it seem like Blake is completely gone, once he gets inside the barn, he gets relatively close to Charlotte and Ginger and just watches them in the dark. And I'm like, okay, he hasn't truly lost control because he's still trying to hold himself back. And then he steps on a bear trap, disabling his right foot. While Charlotte and Ginger flee to the forest, Blake begins to bite through his ankle, severing his foot in this grotesque sequence. We've seen werewolves move on 2 legs and on 4, and in this film we get the best of both worlds. Blake chases Charlotte and Ginger through the forest until they reach the hunting blind from the beginning of the film. We finally come full circle as Blake climbs the ladder to reach them. Charlotte aims her rifle, but once Blake reaches the top, he simply stares back at them. Because of the close father-daughter relationship Blake and Ginger have, she determines that he's in pain and ready to die. Blake ultimately lunges forward, resulting in Charlotte shooting him. The two of them comfort Blake in his final moments before taking in the beauty of the valley that Blake described from his childhood. The circle is now complete as Charlotte and Ginger stand where Blake and Grady once stood. However, I think this image conveys a reconnected family opposed to a broken one. It juxtaposes the toxic relationship between Blake and his father, as Charlotte and Ginger have been brought together by this crucible, thus ending our film. Now, it's time to give this movie a score, and I think I'm gonna go with 7 out of 10. I think there's a lot to appreciate about this film. It charts its own course in regard to the original Wolfman story. It features some great performances from the entire cast, and it tells this narrative in an extremely creative and artful way with the cinematography and visual effects. However, I don't think the story is anything to write home about. I like the themes of family presented in the film, and maybe its message is about how society has moved away from the toxic, masculine household into one that's positive and more commonly being led by a woman. That's what I extracted at least, and I do enjoy that aspect of the film. I guess I just wish we could have explored the Wolfman side of the dad's story a little more and the division that came between him and Blake in the past. There wasn't much resolution to that aside from his death. Additionally, I think the film could have been slightly scarier. And while focusing on Blake's slow transformation was a cool aspect of the film, I think maybe seeing him less could have induced more fear. Maybe even the look of both werewolves could have been more frightening. They're definitely gross and intimidating, but I don't think they're all that scary. And maybe with a more frightening werewolf, we wouldn't have to rely on as many jump scares. But I digress. And if you didn't like this movie, as of today, it's been announced that Robert Eggers will be making a werewolf film dated for Christmas of 2026. So expect that review in 2 to 3 business years. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Studio Cinema Saturday. If you did, be sure to subscribe, drop a like, and let us know your thoughts in the comments section down below. But if you're looking for something else to watch, we have plenty more episodes of Studio Cinema Saturday, Television Tuesday, and our newest show, Buying a Film Its First Drink. Additionally, we are also filmmakers ourselves, so if you want to see what we've made in the realm of low-budget indie short films, go check those videos out. And as always, we'll see you at the next watch.